Chapter 3: Critical Thinking. We can only address modern challenges by discussing critical thinking. If there were one tool we could use to empower everyone, it would be critical thinking. Without critical thinking, we will be at the mercy of corporations, social media, marketing, and governments who have mastered the tools of manipulation which play upon the weaknesses of how our brains have evolved. So then what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is a calculated, intentional examination of facts that aims to facilitate superior decision-making and fostering a comprehensive worldview. Despite its importance, the art of critical thinking is a set of skills that many individuals are not equipped with. The essence of critical thinking is to establish relationships between pertinent facts and narratives or stories, enabling us to access information while minimizing our biases, preconceptions, and personal beliefs. It's helpful to realize that critical thinking is not a destination, but a direction towards optimization, as there is no perfect way to do it. No matter how much we master, our brains will always work against us, focusing on survival and the now. However, with time and practice, we can gain sufficient control to see past most of the bullshit around us. In subsequent writings, blog posts, and other books, I will dive in more, but let's take a simplified look at how our brains work. Our brains work against us with the best intentions, as we are meaning-making machines. The left side of our brain creates meaning and connection where none exists. As a result, we create stories from limited facts, resulting in beliefs and biases that keep us from making well-informed decisions that bring us closer to our goals. Consider that for hundreds of thousands of years, we evolved surviving in dangerous jungles and landscapes of the world. We would be in constant states of survival, identifying life-threatening risks. This led to our brain constantly trying to analyze, compare, and create meaning from limited variables for us to survive. Today, we live in a very different world, but our brains do not know that, so many of these protections still exist. Without diving into critical thinking training, next best thing is to become aware of some of these features of the brain. First, let's look at this idea of what you see is all there is. What you see is all there is a concept to explain how our brains can only make decisions with things we know or know we do not know. So our mind constantly tries to construct the best story from the present facts, but it does not and cannot allow for information it does not have. So what you see as all there is a powerful tool when we need to make fast decisions. But when the variables are complex or we are working with imperfect information, which happens most of the time, we can and often do come to the wrong conclusions with what can be called, in reality, the best guess. Understanding brain functions such as what you see as all there is alone should cause you to pause and consider your decisions and things that upset and bother you. Think about it. We become biased in believing our truth when most of the time our truths are partial truths at best. We must learn to work with our brains, sift through and move past our existing stories, beliefs, and biases to find new understandings and clarity. Remember, our brains are machines for jumping to conclusions. That is why we must learn to constantly challenge our assumption stacks, i.e., our stories and our beliefs, so we can move beyond the meanings our brains have tried to create for us to survive. And instead, look at reality and the facts to make the most well-informed decisions. Of the challenges of the brain, let's now look at biases. Biases are some of the biggest and most commonly faced hurdles we must overcome. First, we must never forget that our brains are bias filtering machines. We are wired to experience the world in a way skewed, and as a result, our perceptions rarely, if ever, reflect reality. Some of these biases are evolutionary and common to everyone, and some occur through our own experiences or our near ancestors. These more subjective biases are often discussed as traumas or emotional wounds. We know that epigenetically these can be passed down from generation to generation, so sometimes it's hard to know whether these things are something that occurred in our life or from our ancestors from a survival standpoint, but we can dive into that another time. Nonetheless, they still create blind spots. just as much, if not more, than our shared biases. I will not dive into traumas here. I will save that for my next book. In general, our biases are toward immediate risks rather than large, potentially more critical long-term risks. Biases tend to focus our attention on something tangible, immediate, and easily imagined or visualized rather than what is highly abstract. Think the risk of a terrorist attack, which is incredibly low, versus the risk of disease, which is higher than you might think. Let's now look at some common biases. First, confirmation bias. We tend to search for and only see information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs, leading to statistical errors. Loss aversion. People tend to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains. It's better to not lose $5 than to find $5. The pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. Negativity bias. Our brains prioritize bad news. Let's now look at the halo effect. The halo effect is a cognitive bias in which our overall impression of a person influences how we feel and think about their character. Another bias is the hindsight bias, the tendency of people to overestimate their ability to have predicted an outcome that could not possibly have been predicted. And this is one of my favorites. It affects so many of us, survivorship bias. The logical error of concentrating on the people or things that made it past some selection process, overlooking those that did not, typically because of their lack of visibility, i.e., believing that just because someone was successful or won something, they have skills or experience or expertise to admire. Last, let's look at the placebo effect. With the topic of biases, it raises an interesting topic in healthcare, the placebo effect. The placebo effect is a result of something called a cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, though similar to a bias, refers to a person's thoughts that are inconsistent and contradict to reality. This effect is very real and documented. In fact, it is an integral aspect of modern medical trials. The placebo effect is a health outcome resulting from a person's anticipation that an intervention, i.e., a drug or some substance, will help or hurt. In the old days, doctors often used sugar pills to help people when they did not need anything more than the belief to heal. Interestingly, there are also cases where people were given an incorrect terminal diagnosis when they were perfectly healthy and still died. So in a very real sense, what you think and believe will have an outcome on any treatment or tool you use. For example, some readers may have read that copper is toxic. It's not. And that it causes health issues at doses over the recommended daily allowance. It does not. The key point is not whether these views are true, as some say, or not, as I say, but whether you believe they are true, or merely harbor doubts about either truth. The point that I'd like you to understand is that we are all biologically compelled to be true and faithful to our thoughts and beliefs, whatever they may be, or may become in the future. This leads us to right now. We are facing a health crisis unlike anything before. In subsequent chapters, we will examine science and why our modern medical system is failing, and most importantly, just because someone with a degree says or publishes something does not make it true or correct. Scientists make mistakes and rarely do their due diligence to know if the science they presume is correct is actually correct. If the original source of information is correct, like a house of cards, the entire house of cards comes falling down. It is now quite common for thousands of subsequent papers and ideas built on these houses of cards to crumble and fail. And always remember, if a lie is repeated sufficiently, it becomes the truth, i.e., a big lie. So please cultivate at least a modicum of disbelief about what you read everywhere, including this book, and realize we have to work at overcoming our biases all the time in order to make the most well-informed decisions. No one operates with all the information, and it will never be perfectly presented. So I hope you will consider the facts and work to overcome potential prejudice against using high levels of some of these minerals. And as always, question the science.